And we are going to talk about some stressors. And would you like to get started with us, Jessica?
Sure, I
Okay.
love to. Again, my name is Jessica, and I'm a student at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. And talking about stressors and the pandemic, oh my goodness, that seems like a topic that we could go on and on about for days.
Yes. What,
Um,
Jessica, which program are you in?
I am in the Counselor Education Supervision, the doctoral program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So there are so many aspects of stress nowadays. We have just general life. We have being parents, being students, being colleagues and coworkers, and just people. We experience stress in so many areas, and so now we're looking at such a snowball with the pandemic, with COVID-19 and the increase of death rates, the political
Climate?
the political stressors, the need for activism and the actual effort of activism. Um, like stress is everywhere. So when looking at mental health, we do have to kind of look at our plate and look at the things that we can carry and the things that we have to set aside at times. We definitely have to make it a priority to prioritize
Mm-hmm.
the levels of stress and really look at what we can address and what we can't and how we can contribute to a cause, to a situation, without allowing it to take over our
Yeah.
mental health. On top of the pandemic or within the pandemic, we have this huge thing about isolation. And Dr. Rush Wilson and I were discussing yesterday about social distancing is not the same as social isolation. There are ways that we can communicate with one another. There are activities that we can engage in independently to still keep our attention and allow us to engage, expand our awareness, our knowledge. There are physical activities that we can engage in to increase our health, our heart rate, to keep us going. It's very easy to get complacent.
Mm-hmm.
And actually I was reviewing an article and they were discussing how different foods can help not decrease or completely, well, can decrease but not eliminate some of the stressors that we experience, anxiety, depression. And so he speaks highly about fatty foods and grains, beans. These are things that we can incorporate into our diet, that can help our moods. That, although we may need some medications to help us, this just may assist just a little bit to decrease stress, decrease anxiety, decrease depression, help improve our sleeping patterns. Because again, it can be easy with isolation to get comfortable.
So I'm going to jump in for just a second. This is
Sure.
something I'd like all of us to consider. We had, and if those of you who have your cameras off, please feel free to come in and out if you want. You can turn the camera on. If you need to leave it off, that's cool. 100 years ago, 103 years ago now, there was a pandemic pretty close to what's going on now. And it was called, the Spanish influenza, even though it really wasn't Spain's issue. Spain just kept better records than other places. So we'll call it the pandemic of 1918 because I feel better about that. And I get to do that today. So the pandemic of 1918. What do you think might have been some of the key things they didn't have going on then that we do have now?
Internet, social
What about it?
media. I
Internet,
mean, we
social
have
media.
ability to assimilate more information to a lot more people faster than they did.
Faster is nice because for some people, they never got information. So obviously they were finding some ways to disseminate certain types of information, because if you look at pictures from 1918, they were wearing the same type of face masks we're wearing now. So apparently little bits and pieces of stuff that was getting out, but there was no Zoom. At least I don't think so. I've looked around. I haven't seen any evidence that there was Zoom back in 1918, 1920. Which means they didn't have access to even seeing each other. We're in different places. Jessica, where are you?
I'm in North Carolina right now. A lot of times you see me, I'm in Florida.
Okay, so you're in North Carolina. Melanie, where are you?
Las Vegas.
Oh, wow. So you're in Las Vegas. Tina?
Dallas, Texas.
Jennifer?
New Orleans.
You're in, oh, I didn't know that. You're in New Orleans. Maria, where are you?
Seattle, Washington.
Oh, wow. I love Seattle. Seattle. D. Newton. All I can see is D. Where are you? Can't hear.
She's in North Carolina as well.
Thank you. And then Renee, where are you? Don't know where we're. Hey, can't hear Renee at all, but Renee's not muted. To look and see if there's something on my end. But the point is, and I'm in Toronto right now, even though I've been trying for 2 days to get out of here and go back to Ohio. Buffalo, for whatever reason, always has a weather issue, and I can't make it through I-90 because of the ice. So we'll see if I can go make it back tomorrow, hopefully. So we're all over the place, but we're talking in real time. We are in different time zones. Nevada, the last I was there, was in a very different time zone than Ontario. So we're in different time zones in different places, but we're still able to communicate. So there's a piece of social connection that we do have that didn't exist that last go around 100 years ago. So that's nice. At the same time, and I can order my groceries. I can have Instacart bring them to me. I can do everything I need to do without really going outside of the house. At the same time, that creates a problem too. What problem might that create?
A type of isolation.
Yes. So while we are still interacting, there's still I only see the same two people all the time for like a year. And thank goodness, I'm thinking, oh, we moved right before the pandemic. We were in a much smaller place. I might be living alone because I might have gotten rid of those other two people who live in my house if I had to live in that tiny little house we were in for a year without going outside. It's very difficult. And the other part of my bubble, the other two people are my parents. They're 4 hours away in Ohio across an international border, whole different place. It's very difficult to connect. So there is a sense of isolation and urgency to connect to other people. So we have, it's like six of one, half dozen of the other. So on the one hand, yay, we can still work and go to school and do the things we need to do, but wow, we're doing it at such a distance. We don't actually have physical contact with other people. And touch is actually a variable that is necessary for health for people. Even exposure to the sun is necessary for people. I have a client who has actually not left her house since last March. I don't know why she thinks that's what she was told to do. Nobody ever said don't go outside, but that's what she believes. And she is incredibly depressed but afraid to leave the house because of COVID. And we got to do some re-education because she has no exposure to vitamin D. And it's already low when the sun is, when it's cloudy, not a good thing. Okay. Jessica, I'll let you jump back in.
Sure. So speaking of the pandemic of 1918, I found it extremely interesting that one thing that was going on then that's not happening now is a war. They were in the midst of World War One. And so during this time, when the soldiers came back, they did not initially show signs of of a virus, but just like we've experienced in the last year, it came in waves. And so it was very interesting to actually read an interview with a historian, and this was her focus. And so she was able to identify one major difference, which was the war from then. And for us, the major difference is the ability to communicate, to see one another, to pick up the phone and call one another, like Dr. Rush Wilson said, that communication piece. However, on the flip side, experiencing war, of course, was a huge psychological stressor for everyone. Not everyone not everyone who experienced stress was actually a soldier in the war. There were still psychological stressors, just as individuals that may have not been at the White House just not too long ago. There's still a stress that's associated with it, and so we're also experiencing that now. Dr. Rush Wilson, something I found extremely interesting that, I thought maybe we could pick up on later on. I was looking at the emergence of Freud with the id, ego, and superego. And so for those of you who are not counseling students, um, Freud is one of the main founders that we look at when we think about counseling and mental health. And so, one of his most major publications that we've studied time and time again was published in 1925, which is just after this pandemic that was experienced. And so, so there were major markers that were documented. There were not only the psychological stressors, the mental health concerns, there were physical health concerns as well. And so I found it, incredible to see that so much of his work, came after that. And I think that just speaks volumes to what we may be approaching. And so there was another gentleman who wrote an article, and he stated that we may not see the results of this stress for a year, months, or years to come. And so I think that may have been what happened with Freud, was that, the pandemic occurred, and then people, over time were able to report it, more and more, the experiences that they were having, the sleep disturbances, the depression, the anxiety. There was even a term that referred to um, like an anxiety of being around people. And so when we're doing a diagnostic assessment or a clinical or biopsychosocial assessment now, we might refer to that as agoraphobia. But then there was no term for it. And so it's incredible to see, history repeat itself. Dr. Rush Wilson, another thing that I found interesting was that they're looking at revising the acute stress disorder criteria. And I think that that's going to be huge. They're really looking at two major things: preoccupation with stress and failure to adapt. We're all struggling to adapt to this new way of life. No touching, no hugging, and wearing masks by ourselves.
And here's something else we have to keep in mind. We live in an era now, in the last, let's say, 15 years or so, where things change really, really rapidly. So there's always something new coming. You don't see yourself as a celebrity now because you've been in motion pictures. You might be a TikTok star. You might be a YouTube star. So things happen really quickly, and sometimes we have our own agency, our own hand in promoting our own success, our own celebrity. And for instance, I heard somebody yesterday talk about, on YouTube, I watch blah, blah, blah. And it was interesting because YouTube is seen as a channel, as a mode of entertainment that's not controlled by three major networks or by cable networks. Netflix is the same. So we have a little more agency in connecting to things. Case in point, with things changing quickly, there's a video that I saw probably on YouTube. I think I also saw it on the Today Show, with a little girl. She must be, I don't know, she was probably 2. And as she was walking, every time she got near something, it could have been a box for like a utility box or whatever, anything that's that low to the ground, she put her hands underneath it and rubbed them together. In her mind, everything was a hand sanitizing station. But in her world, that's normal. If she was 2 or so, that's all she knows. The anchor on the Today Show has a daughter who's 3, and she was looking at pictures of herself from when she was 1 and said, "Mommy, where's my mask?" That's her normal. That normal necessarily influences how people will navigate life. That's what we'll do. That's what we know. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's, I mean, it's so very true. And, speaking of changes, there was, years ago, they used to say that sitting in front of the TV too long was not healthy and, you need to take a rest. And
Mhm.
now we're expected for our children to look at a TV screen all day.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, so changes do happen, and
Mhm.
and it definitely does, cause for adjustment, and so how do we adjust? What do you guys think? What do you guys feel have been the most effective ways to adjust to all of the changes that we've encountered?
And since we're opening up, let me ask you this. In addition to the adjustments, what has been the most stressful piece of this for you? No, you don't have to all rush to speak at the same time.
I
What
think
has been the
people
most?
have been using art and creativity. They've been finding ways to be more creative, to express themselves either through laughter, different challenges you see on TikTok, and
Mhm.
just a way to release their stress, anxiety, or whatever they may be dealing with. So that's what I noticed. And a lot of people have embraced outside, the ones who can, with walking and trying to live a little bit more healthy lifestyle.
Excellent. Thank you. What has been most stressful about this for you, Jennifer?
For me, it's the people at my job, the crazy people at my work, that a lot of them do not wear masks.
Mhm.
We had someone who was infected, and still afterwards, they refuse to wear a mask. And so the most stressful is just people that I have to deal with not taking it seriously, not for themselves, not for anyone. And it comes even from upper management,
Mhm.
where you have these rules, but, few are following it.
Mhm. Thank you. Anybody else?
For me, it's been going to the grocery store,
Mhm.
trying to keep the social distance in the grocery store.
Mhm.
I think I do a bad job of it. I, I can't put it all off on the rest of the patrons, but normally when I'm out, because that's not something I'm used to doing, like I typically go, I have my mind set on what I'm going to go and get, and I want to go grab what I need to grab and get out the store. And I
Mhm.
don't think I'm always as conscious as I need to be to pay attention, like someone else is standing there. Sometimes I do, but most times it's like, okay, if I see in sight what it is I want to grab, I'll say, excuse me, grab it and move, because I want to move. Like, I don't want to stay here in this space with you. So why,
Mhm.
especially if somebody's browsing, like if they're trying to figure it out, but I
Mhm.
can actually see what I want, it's like, I want to just, excuse me, can I grab this and go? And so that's like stressful for me, because I come away like, Tina, you didn't honor their space, you didn't honor their time, you didn't. So I have to do all this processing, and, because I'm a Christian, I have to chastise myself and rebuke myself and say I'm gonna do better. And, so that's been stressful for me.
So you're using it as both a way to experience your frustration and a way to grow. Okay, excellent. Anybody else want to talk about their frustrations? What's been most frustrating and what adjustments they've recognized and noticed?
Hi, this is Maria. I would
Hi.
say one of the most frustrating things that I've experienced in the pandemic is one of my self-care techniques is dancing.
Mhm.
I've always been a dancer, taking classes, and I would travel to
Mhm.
Atlanta or do classes here in Seattle or LA, just as a way. That's my way to just release all stress from the work that I do.
Mhm.
And now during the pandemic, like I'm not able to do that. That was like a great joy for me. And even like I can take classes via Zoom or
Mhm.
Teams. It's different because you you get this energy from other dancers in the room. Like you get hype from somebody else that's dancing near you that is just doing a move like maybe a little bit better. So it pushes you harder. So when you're doing it in your living room or in the garage, it's not quite the same.
Right.
So that has been a major adjustment for me. I would say a stressor, I would agree with Jennifer, of like other people not necessarily taking it maybe as serious and not wearing their masks as they should. You know, I think about like I'm not only doing it for myself, but other families and other older people that is in the world and kids that this can affect more seriously if they were to, you know, get this disease. And it's just, you know, it's just sad. It just saddens me sometimes when I see other people and like they're in a store and they refuse to wear a mask. And now you have a grocery store manager going over to you to explain like you have to wear a mask. It's just like put it on for like 15 minutes. You're in a grocery store and you'll be absolutely fine. But yeah, it's been an adjustment. But I will say, as you mentioned, Dr. Rush, the FaceTimes, the Zooms, they do help because you're able to like have some type of communication and social outlet with people, even though it's not face to face. Most of my family is in North Carolina, so it has been very difficult in that way with you know, socializing and being with my family and like my grandmother who is 84 and you know, my mom and dad. So yeah, it has been an adjustment, but you know, having a good support system and just using the techniques that we have in order to like communicate as much as you can.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. I appreciate that. Is there anyone else? Anybody else want to share? No? Okay.
Hey, this is Ebony.
Hello, Ebony.
Here, I'll show on camera. I was eating, so I didn't. I wasn't on there earlier. Sorry. So I will say the biggest adjustment for me, particularly as a counselor, has been really focusing on how to deal with other people's trauma when you yourself are being traumatized real time. And learning how to seek out that support system when you can't really be near other people. And learning different ways to self-soothe has been a big adjustment. Learning how to respect other people's boundaries because of the fear of catching COVID, you know, like with my family. You know, I saw patients virtually most of last year, and then toward the end of the year, I was seeing them face to face. Well, when I started seeing my patients face to face again, it's like all of a sudden my family didn't want me around for Thanksgiving and Christmas and things like that, and that hurt. But I had to respect that because they're just fearful of catching COVID because now I'm exposed to extra people more than before. And, you know, so having to deal with that, but then while I'm hurting because I can't see my family, I'm now having to leave that at the door and still hold space for other people bringing their stuff in, you know, so it's definitely been a big adjustment for sure. So,
you know, it's interesting you bring up a point, and it's something that I really am concerned about. I wonder what is going to happen to those of us who are supporters once this actually is over. So let's say COVID stopped on June 1st, like there was a hard stop for some reason, there's just no more COVID as of June 1st. By June 10th or 12th, I would wonder about all the people who are working really hard to keep everybody mentally and physically healthy. I do wonder how that's going to just drop off all of a sudden. I think about in particular my two of my clients who are physicians and how many people they see die on a regular basis because of the types of medical practices they're in. And the one who just has these bouts, she just breaks out crying. And yesterday through Zoom, she had this bout. She just didn't know why she's crying, and she's crying. And maybe her boyfriend just wouldn't want a person with the kind of job she has. Thinking, no, that doesn't really make sense, but let's flesh it through. And when we did flesh it through, she actually saved the life of the person who, and I don't know how she remembered this, was the greeter at the restaurant when she and her boyfriend went on their first date. She just remembered that person. And when she recognized him, she looked up his name and it connected, and it just activated all kinds of, he's not going to want to be in a relationship with me. And just all kinds of stuff because it was too much pressure. And it became symbolic for her relationship. And I mean, she was pulling for straws. Like, my third grade teacher might be a criminal. Just all kinds of stuff was coming up because that's the space she was in. So we had to let her get through all of it. And 5-6 months from now, that particular episode might be funny to her, but her brain was scrambling because it was in crisis. And she was pulling every kind of crisis she could pull. None of them actually were logical, but this situation isn't logical. This doesn't make sense. So I do wonder what's going to happen to those of us who are studying, those of us who are practicing in healthcare fields once it does stabilize and we don't have increases and it's not such a big issue anymore. So Ebony, everything you said makes great sense to me. We are living in the era of the sympathetic nervous system. And we are activated regularly because we are living in a time that I hope we never revisit in our lifetimes. Once every 100 years is more than enough with this. This has been hard. There are people who are no longer in contact with their families, some because they have situations similar to yours. One of my physicians says she strips down to her underwear in her garage every day because she knows the minute she opens that door, her children are going to come running wanting to hug her. And she doesn't want them to touch what she's been wearing in the hospital all day. So thank goodness she has an attached garage, but still it's cold and you're still overwhelmed and frustrated. And you're walking in your house in your bikini looking outfit every day and your kids think it's funny, not understanding really because they're small, how much pressure mom is under and how mom can't eat in her job anymore. She eats in her car because she's afraid somebody might walk past and cough while she's eating. So there is stress constant.
Yeah.
Woman. Yeah.
I would say my roommate is literally in the same position. She works at the hospital, and when she walks in the door, before there are any highs or anything, she goes straight to her room and strips down and showers, and then she comes back out and has a conversation. Like, but there's no communication until she's been able to shower. You know, yeah,
it's a lot. It's a lot for all of us living through this, but particularly those people who have to interface with a clientele. It's hard.
I was going to say, you see, well, here in New Orleans, we've been seeing two folds of that. One is the responsible people who strips and make sure they're not exposing others to it. And then we've been seeing the other half where even in my neighborhood, we see these, have several neighbors who are doctors in the medical field, and they're just walking with their uniform on, walking their dogs, talking to other neighbors, and just totally ignoring that they could possibly spread something. And also too, you've been seeing here, we've been seeing a lot of people who's just drinking, they're ignoring the rules because they want to forget and just go back to the way things are. And so even though they know there's a pandemic, in their mind, they have to switch it out. They switched it out so they can feel normal to, I guess, save their mental capacity as much as they can. And so we've been seeing a lot of drug use, more drinking, and just people who wouldn't normally violate rules have been violating. And it's not just lower economic, it's higher economic status too. So it crosses.
Yeah, there's some mythology around who's listening and who's not. You have people from every group, all kinds of walks of life who are responding in very different ways. There's diversity there. One thing I mentioned, and then Jessica, I'll turn it back over to you for a minute too, is we are having a sympathetic nervous system response. And we know the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous system. And typically, for some reason, we only talk about fight or flight. There are 6 F's that fall in there, all kind of related. So we have fight, flight, freeze, flood, fawn, fatigue. So we have the person who fights. We understand that if a bear runs in the room, that's the person who's like, all right, I got this bear, while everybody else leaves. And you may never see that person again because we probably shouldn't be fighting certain things. That person who is walking through the neighborhood, not caring what's going on, in some way, they are fighting a little bit against what they're being told to do. You can have some consequences from fighting. Flight That's what a lot of people do. They try to get away from whatever it is they believe is the issue. The sad piece about that is if you don't really understand the threat when you flee, then you sometimes make some mistakes. So when you sometimes hear people who are of Asian descent talk about how they are treated, I have a client who is Asian who's heard some absolutely horrendous things because the initial belief was that this, well, it may have been, I don't know where it actually started. None of us really do. But we know that cases started coming out of a part of China. So then people started blaming individual Chinese people for a virus, even though they weren't even on that continent at all. So sometimes that flight thing doesn't always work. We have freeze. Some people who just don't do anything. Kind of also reminds me, Jennifer, of what you were saying with the people walking the dogs while they're in scrubs. Just freeze. They're just not doing anything. I'm just gonna act like it's not here. I feel better like this. It was kind of like when I heard Michael Jackson died. I said, no, he didn't. And I kept going on with my day. I just didn't want to deal with it. So I'm just going to freeze emotionally until I can deal with it later because I'm a kid who grew up in the era where that was the music around. Flooding. That's when you just have so many emotions coming, you're just overwhelmed, and you actually end up looking a bit like the person who freezes. You might be talking about it a lot, you just can't get past it. That's the person who's flooded. The fawn is the one who kind of submits, they cooperate, they do whatever you tell them to do. Just whatever. So if somebody says at one point hydroxychloroquine was something that people thought might have had something, they had a little bit of research around it for a while, but people who actually had illnesses that required that drug couldn't get it anymore because some of the fawn people started buying it up in mass. So then other people are going, I really need this. This is not experimental for me. Stop doing this. But those people who fawn and just believed what they were being told created some interesting vibes. And then fatigue. That's the person who's like, forget it. I'll just go to bed. I'm checking out. I don't care. It's too much. Don't like this. So those are our 6 responses to threats. And then ultimately, when our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, then we kind of breathe. And I'll talk about some of the things we can do to stimulate our parasympathetic nervous system in a little bit. Jessica.
So, Dr. Rush Wilson, I'm glad that you mentioned Asian culture because another instance where history has repeated itself is back in the 1919, there was a rejection of Asian remedies. And so at some point there was a shift to recognize that that there were benefits. Well, and this was according to the interview of the influenza historian. Well, fast forward, we do know that that there was an accusation of the of COVID-19 beginning in Asia. Well, now we have we have touchless culture. So they have already they've already gotten so accustomed to this. This is what they do, and they have ways to communicate and different meanings. Dr. Rush Wilson, I know that you and I discussed namaste and bowing. There are other ways to greet one another where we didn't really acknowledge those things, but now they may be definitely of benefit where we can still show the respect and the expression of love to one another without having physical contact. I found it absolutely, incredible what you mentioned about keeping the energy inside with the namaste and keeping the hands together. I felt like that was, I didn't know that. And it makes so much sense, And so when we look at, for those of you who may have engaged in yoga practices or seen yoga before, Dr. Rush Wilson explained to me that when the hands are put together and you bow, that's actually not only is it acknowledging, Dr. Rush Wilson, please correct me if I'm wrong, the God in you acknowledges the God in me. But the closing of the hands and the arms is also maintaining the positive energy, keeping your positive energy to yourself and not opening yourself up to negative energy. And so I find that absolutely incredible that Chinese culture was mocked for their remedies, and then mocked the for COVID-19. And now here we are, looking at how we could possibly use those. So I do think that it's quite interesting how once again history is repeating itself. Um, Another thing that we wanted to just kind of go over in terms um, of COVID and I believe this is kind of mentioned, kind of hit the surface, but the race relations and the political unrest.
Mhm.
When once again, looking back at World War One, I found it interesting to look at the Black soldiers who were in World War One, and they were actually loaned to the French army because they were viewed to be not beneficial, and to not be able to serve or protect their fellow comrades. Well, that is so very interesting because there was a gentleman by the name of Henry Johnson, and he was fighting and defending the French army at that time because Black soldiers were loaned to the French to fight. He was fighting the Germans, and in this particular instance, everyone around him had somewhat fallen. I believe it was also a snowstorm, and this gentleman fought off up to 30 German troops to the point where they retreated. He sustained over 20 wounds. Um, he didn't have the weapons that he normally would have because he put the wrong ammunition in in his weapon, and so I believe it was down to like a knife, and so he just like his heroic efforts completely disproved the theory that a Black soldier would not fight. And the unfortunate part is that not only once he put forth that effort, he put his life on the line, and of course he had to fight tremendously to not only fight off 30 soldiers, but he actually killed 4 of the soldiers. Afterwards, there was a Jim Crow like letter to be sent to France, and implying, not to offer too much praise to Black soldiers because we were going through a transition. We were just off of the Reconstruction era in the United States. And when Mr. Johnson got back home, he did not have the support that you would think a hero would have. Actually, France gave him a medal in, I believe it was 1917, maybe just after that. But France gave him a medal, but the United States would not acknowledge his heroic efforts. It took 97 years for him to be acknowledged.
Mhm.
And that brings us to so much that's going on today because race relations amongst the African American community is so very prevalent. Dr. Rush Wilson enlightened me to a study that was looking at telomere length.
Telomeres, yes. Actually have that pulled up right now. You know what telomeres are? Most of you? Okay, so telomeres are on a strand of DNA. They're the little tiny caps that are the ends on a strand of DNA. I'm thinking, what has a cap on it? Sometimes like the back of an ink pen will have like a round thing on it. It's that your telomere is like that cap on your DNA. So it's the little thing that kind of keeps it smooth. Chronic stress actually degrades the telomeres, and the telomere length starts to decrease, and then that strand of DNA dies more quickly because it is eroding faster. Kind of a simplistic way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Follow me? Okay. All right. What were you going to say about my telomeres?
And so I see it. So the the veteran Johnson, he passed away at, they believe he was about 36 years old, which was about 9 years after he returned. And so when we look at today and the high mortality rates, we're not only looking at the lack of access to healthcare in disadvantaged communities. We are also looking at the race relations and the increased stress. There was actually a study, their dissertation was conducted on the stress and telomere, and looking at women, Black women versus Black men, the integration of religion, and Black men are at an extremely high mortality rate, not only because of racial distress, police brutality, and the misuse of force, but also because of the stress level. Men, according to a study here, men do internalize and hold on to more of the stress. Less communication, less catharsis, less verbalization, and they are less likely to engage in treatment. And so all of this, contributes to the high mortality rate. And then when they're experiencing physical or health issues, they're less likely to get treatment. And so when we look at, then we have the stress of protests and attempting to explain our situations, and in some instances even decreasing our reactions in order to maintain the comfort of other races. It's a lot. There's so much stress, within the Black community.
Yeah, so let's look at this. We're talking about the biological impact of all of this stress on people. So you have these little caps on your DNA, these telomeres. They're at the end of the strand. Every time your cells divide, it loses a little bit of the telomere just because that's the way it is. That's the way the body works. But we have an enzyme that can replenish it. That enzyme doesn't activate quite properly when we have a lot of cortisol, which is our stress hormone, or just a lot of chronic stress. So then that telomere dies. That strand may die, or this is the other thing it can do. It can either die or become inflammatory. So it can even become a problem. So our bodies are full of these little explosive, bomby, hurtful things, in part because of the amount of stress that we may experience. And while that certainly is pronounced for people of color or people of disenfranchised groups, it's important for people, period, because people experience unnecessary stresses in so many different instances. So we as clinicians have to be aware of that, but we as humans have to be aware of it so that we can take care of ourselves as well. So I do want to make sure I cover these 6 things that I want to make sure you take away. First, does anybody have a mantra? You have a mantra, Tina?
It's pretty much the serenity prayer.
Okay. That is a mantra. So when you are feeling particularly stressed, that might be helpful for you. My mantra is, I hate wasting time. And I actually need to hear myself say it aloud. I hate wasting time. And it can be because I'm picking up something and this thing fell and that thing fell, and I'm starting to get frustrated because if I have to stop and pick it up, it's taking more time. I hate wasting time. And that's how I can kind of stop myself, pick up all the stuff I'm dropping or whatever happens to be going on, and move it forward. One of the things that you may want to do is have a mantra that allows you to reconnect to the pieces of yourself that you feel like you're missing at any particular time. So that is one takeaway. Here's number 2, my reset. And I actually visually see this. It makes me laugh because I see this place in real life when I go run. I'm a runner. I have to run every day, even when it's 12 degrees outside in Toronto, gotta go run because I need it. I know that if I don't, nobody likes me. So I need to go run so I can discharge that anxiety. There's one part of my run where I have to run down a relatively steep hill so that I can get back home through a park. I've fallen on this hill twice, so I should have learned my lesson. But one of the things I've noticed is when I'm running down this hill, what I will do is I always slow down. Even in the summers, I slow down a little bit because you build up some momentum when you're running. And anxiety feels like momentum. Anxiety is kind of that future thing, that what if, that thing that is making me anxious, making me stressed. So I feel like I'm running toward my anxiety. And sometimes I will physically stop when I'm on that hill and let the inertia kind of stop. And then when I feel like my footing is right where it needs to be, then I'll finish running. So it might just be a second or 2 that I stop. But if I'm going too fast, if I try to slow myself down, it might not work. But if I stop, it will work. Life can be that way too. When it feels like everything is building up and things are coming from every direction, if we stop for a minute and take a breath, which is another thing on this list, let that breath out. You know what Ujjayi breathing is in yoga? You breathe in but you can hear yourself breathe out. That kind of breathing is pan-cultural. Lots of cultures do it, have different names for it, but taking in that breath, that cleansing breath, I've heard it called too, and breathing out is the same as me stopping on that hill. And this morning, when I knew I was going to share this with you, I actually ran the whole way down in the grass thinking, I'm not falling today. I'm not getting broke up on this hill. But that hill is symbolic to me for all the stuff that can come rushing towards you in life. If you stop, assess where you are, and then move forward, it helps you reduce your stress. The other thing is movement. We heard somebody talk about being a dancer and how you pick up energy from other people when you can do it in person. We don't always have that opportunity right now. Sometimes we do, sometimes we may not. But that movement alone can be helpful. Just allowing your body to release the endorphins that you need can come from the movement. And endorphin really technically means endogenous morphine, chemicals in your own body that allow you to experience joy or levity. Face change. I was in a DBT workshop once and they gave us this little interesting tool that I still think is kind of funny. And what they asked us to do was to take your hands and cover your face. And do it. Cover your face. You make the most ridiculous face you can think of while your hands are covering your face. And just hold it for a second. Then you release that face, have your normal face, and move your hands. Typically, you feel a little bit better because you just did something super silly and nobody knows exactly what you looked like a few seconds ago. So I've even had sessions where I'm talking to my client and then I just kind of do it and I'm making the most ridiculous face I can so that I can kind of reset and feel a little bit better, especially if it's starting to escalate in some way and I need to reset myself. So that was like a nice quick trick that we learned. Laughter. Laughter is another thing. Laughter is therapeutic. Make sure you find ways, reasons, spaces to laugh. The show Ridiculousness, I always have probably 20 episodes of it saved on my television, largely because I can't believe grown people do some of the stuff that they do, but I need to see these silly things so that I can laugh because the work that I'm doing, especially over the last year clinically, has not been funny. So finding ways to laugh is incredibly helpful. That's therapeutic. It's a stress combatant. And then the final one, which probably should have been, well, I don't want to say should, probably ideally would have been the first one, is acknowledging it. Just saying, I am really stressed out. This is too much for me right now. This is more than I want to carry. Let me figure out some ways to distribute some of this, disseminate some of this, dismiss some of this, because this is heavy. We are trained to be helpers. We believe that we need to be helpers. We are skilled to be helpers or learning to become helpers, either professionally, within our families, within our homes. So if we can't acknowledge that at times we need stuff too, then we end up sometimes reacting in ways that might not be that friendly. You know, my inclination to take all the dishes and throw them away the other day probably wouldn't have been a good idea. Put them in the dishwasher, didn't take much longer, but I figured nobody else wants them. That's why they're not washing them, so I'll just throw them away. And then thinking that that means I'll have to replace them might not be the best idea, but at least I'm acknowledging I am so frustrated that I want to throw my dishes away. I won't be washing them either. You don't wash them? I don't wash them, just throw them away. We can all use paper plates. We can all just put soup in our hands and drink it. So acknowledging it allowed me to laugh at myself. So I incorporated more than one thing because it really doesn't take me a lot of effort to put the dishes in the dishwasher right next to the sink because my mind is going, how much effort would it have taken you to put this plate in the sink, in the dishwasher? And I'm thinking, well, how much effort would it take me to put it in there? So if it's bothering me, let me put it in there and let it go. And probably don't throw it away. So those 6 things, having a mantra, doing resets, movement, the face change cheat, laughter and acknowledgments can be really small things that you take away from this experience with us for this hour that might be helpful for you as you are navigating through a really tumultuous politically health crisis. We have political things we're dealing with. We have health things we're dealing with, social isolation, distance, all these things that we are actually doing pretty well with navigating. We're doing okay, but they still feel stressful in real time. While it could be worse, it could be better. So let's acknowledge the parts that we are doing well. Thank goodness for Instacart. I feel like I should write them a letter. That's been awesome. Thank goodness for whatever genius thought paying at the pump with a card was a good idea back whenever that happened. Thank you for that person. Whoever thought watching the Jetsons and talking to people through a screen would be a good idea one day, thank you, because this has been awesome. Living like George Jetson and his family has been amazing. I appreciate it. And I hope that you can take these little things, these acknowledgments, and help yourself when you're feeling stressed. All right, Jessica, want to wrap us up?
Well, I first want to just say thank everybody for their input, for their time, and for being able to come on today. We appreciate each and every one of you. We thank you, and we hope that we could have the opportunity to see you again the next time that we conduct Trust the Process. And everyone have a great day. And please take these 6 items with you, because there's no question they can help you just maintain through it all. So I truly thank you.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Dr. Rushworth, really quick.
Yeah.
Mantra, movement, laughter, reset. What were the other 2?
Mantra, reset, movement, face change, laughter, and acknowledgement.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You are welcome. Hello.
Hello.
Let me stop the recording.
Sorry,